The lungs themselves are going to be the main point of oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange. But look at the lungs. How are they built? What are the structures? When you start looking at a cross-sectional view like this, you'll notice that the heart is right in the middle. No problem, we've talked about the heart in previous videos. But look at the rest of that. Everything else is all lungs at this point. It fills the entire area, the entire space. So you've occupied pretty much all of that thoracic cavity. Only the actual center right here where you have the trachea coming out of the heart, that's the only thing that's not filled with lungs. And what we can notice here is all the blood flow going to lungs. This right here is your pulmonary trunk. That's what's branching off and taking blood from the heart into the lungs, into every single alveolar sac, making sure it has maximum amount of coverage. So lungs themselves, you'll notice here that on the right and left side, you have different numbers of lobes. On the right side, you'll notice the superior lobe. You then have the middle lobe and the inferior lobe. But on the left side, there's only two lobes. You only have the superior and then the inferior lobe. So we have a little difference on right versus left as far as number of lobes. 3 lobes right, 2 lobes left. And you can notice that you have the trachea coming down, branching then to the main bronchi, or the primary bronchi. Going beyond that, then you get to the secondary and tertiary, or the lobar and segmental. You'll notice how it's going to each individual lobe, lobar, and then each one of those branches out to the segments. You can really see it here in this respiratory tree. You can see all of the initial primaries, the right and left primary bronchi, but then you can really see how it splits and splits and splits into all these different segmental branches. Because they're getting smaller, and the coloration here helps you identify the different segments you see. Now, we don't need to know every individual segment, thankfully, but just look at the branching. It's showing how the air that comes in is going to each individual portion of the lungs. Now, lungs are covered by pleura. This is a thin double membrane system. If you go back, we talked about this with the heart, with the digestion. We talked about way back in AP1, that very first chapter, the visceral and parietal membranes. The idea here is you're going to have the parietal pleura. Now, parietal means it's lining the cavity wall. So the parietal pleura is lining the thoracic cavity, while the visceral pleura is like saran wrap on the lungs. So it's wrapping very tightly around the lungs, the visceral pleura. So we have parietal and visceral pleura. Both two different membranes, visceral tight to the lungs, parietal is lining the cavity. And in between the two, there's a very thin space. This little slit is fluid filled. And that fluid is going to serve 2 main purposes. First off, provides lubrication. Every time you breathe, doesn't matter if it's a shallow breath, a deep breath, every breath causes the lungs to expand and contract. It just depends on how much they expand or how little. But that expansion is movement. That movement would create friction if you didn't have this fluid in between. Secondly, surface tension. One of the ways the lungs is working is by allowing the surface tension to pull the lungs out as the rib cage expands, or pull the lungs down as the diaphragm contracts. That increased lung volume, and therefore allows you to breathe in, inhale. But that's all because you have some surface tension, plus some other factors we'll get to. But they're helping to keep the lungs tight to the ribs and tight to the diaphragm. So this double membrane system is really helping out for 2 different reasons. So if we're looking at this, we'll notice that this larger picture here is just this tiny little there blown up, that tiny little spot. What you're seeing is this layer right here is the parietal pleura. Then just inside, right in the lungs, is the visceral pleura. The space in between, you'll note, is the pleural cavity. That's the fluid filled. That very thin little slit. But that goes all the way around the lungs, the entire size of your thoracic cavity. So these aren't small membranes. They're thin, yes, but they cover quite a bit of space, the entire lung and the entire thoracic cavity. So a little about the pleura, the two different membranes around the lungs, and a little about the basic structure of the lungs.